Hello, Marilyn Arnone here again. At the end of the first video lecture on learning outcomes this week, I introduced Bloom's taxonomy for the cognitive domain, one of 3 domains of learning, including the affective and psychomotor domains. In this lecture, I'll explain how this taxonomy can help you in constructing your learning outcomes. But first, a brief history on the taxonomy. I'll take you all the way from Bloom's original taxonomy published in 1956, all the way to Andrew Church's version of Bloom's digital taxonomy, revised for today's world. Benjamin Bloom saw the taxonomy, according to Krathwohl, as a common language about learning goals to facilitate communication across persons, subject matter, and grade levels. It had 6 levels, with the knowledge level at the bottom of the pyramid and evaluation at the top. Each level of the pyramid increased in complexity and yet provided the foundation for the level above. It proved to be very useful in developing a way to assess learning with consistency across educational institutions. The revised version was published in the early 1990s by Lauren Anderson, a former student of Bloom's, and David Krathwohl, a Syracuse University professor. I was fortunate to have Dr. Krathwohl as a professor in my doctoral program in instructional design at the School of Education. He passed away in October of 2016, having made more contributions to research and education than anyone I've known. He was truly inspiring. The revised version is on the left, while the original version is on the right. Instead of using nouns like knowledge, understanding, application, the revised version used verbs like remember, understand, apply. Do you have any thoughts on why perhaps using verbs was better than using nouns? Think about it. An important reason is that thinking is an active process. Nouns don't reflect that, but verbs do. The other big difference is that the top level in the revised version became create. The original version had evaluation at the top level, and evaluate is now under create, taking the place of the former category of synthesis. When writing your learning outcomes, consider the level of thinking skills you wish to invoke in your learners, from lower order thinking skills to higher order thinking skills. Remember level skills are about recalling facts and basic concepts. At the next level, a student should be able to explain ideas and concepts. Being able to understand ideas and concepts is necessary in order to apply and use information in new situations. At the top level of the taxonomy, you want your learners to produce new or original work. There is more to consider. In addition to the cognitive process dimension that we're looking at here, Krathwohl categorizes learning across a knowledge dimension. There isn't just knowledge. There are types of knowledge: factual, conceptual, procedural, and metacognitive. Krathwohl shows both dimensions in his taxonomy table. We as educators need to consider both the cognitive process dimension as well as the type of knowledge when creating our learning outcomes. Does our learning outcome involve factual knowledge, conceptual knowledge, procedural knowledge, or metacognitive knowledge? And at what level of thinking skills, higher order or lower order? Please read the article by Krathwohl for a full understanding of this way of conceptualizing learning. But even before you read the whole article, check your understanding right now. I'll give you a learning outcome, and you think about where I should place the X. That is, in which cell does it belong? Here's the teaching scenario and the learning outcome to think about. The instructional librarian at a rural community college is holding a workshop entitled Hone Your Information Skills at the beginning of the fall semester. 10 students have signed up. Each has chosen a topic to research that's relevant to one of the courses they are taking. Here's one of her intended learning outcomes. After completing the workshop, students determine which of the 3 web-based resources contains the most reliable information for their research project. Here's the taxonomy table again. In which cell do you think I should place the X? I'll give you some wait time to think about it. Okay, time's up. I would place the X right here. I chose this cell because determining resources to use based on reliable information infers that students will evaluate the resources for their reliability using criteria. And I put it in conceptual knowledge because criteria, such as reliability, accuracy, and so on, is classified as conceptual knowledge. I'm sure there could be arguments made for a different placement, but that's my choice and I'm sticking to it. I also want to mention that the taxonomy table can be useful in classifying the learning activities you're planning in order to achieve the learning outcomes. Well, you might think that it ends there with Anderson and Krathwohl's revised taxonomy. However, as we entered the digital age, the tweaking continued. A few years back, someone else wondered, how can we make the taxonomy even more useful for defining and assessing the types of digital tasks that students engage in today? Where would these new verbs fit into Bloom's taxonomy for the cognitive domain? So Andrew Churches started working on that. This time, Churches added ing to the verbs, so create became creating, and so on. Why do you suppose this was done? Food for thought. The major contribution that Churches made was exploring the verbs of today's world that didn't even exist back in 1956 or even around 1990. Verbs like blogging and vlogging and digitizing, downloading and remixing, wikiing, and so on. Now look at the verbs on each level in Churches' version, Bloom's digital taxonomy. They relate to today's digital world on the 6 levels of the taxonomy. And there have been many useful variations on Churches' graphic applied to a variety of technology applications. As I mentioned in my first video lecture this week, we'll be talking about assessing our learning outcomes in week 4. But keep in mind that if your learning outcome and your instructional activities have been on the applying level, then your assessment must be on that same level. If students have learned to apply rules of netiquette in an activity, then they should not be asked to evaluate those rules in an assessment. That wouldn't be fair. For a full understanding of the revised taxonomy and Churches' application to the digital world in which we now live, please read the articles in the Additional Resources section. Thank you.